Hello, BookTube. Welcome to Weekly Reads. My reading week this past week has been, for the most part, pretty good, except for the last few days. And I will get to that first because I have two bills to talk about. And then the two books I read, the books I'm planning on reading the next few weeks. And then I do have a conundrum that I do want to talk a bit about. So let's get on with the bills. So the first bill is Interior Chinatown by Charles Yu. This is an experimental work, I would say, in which Willis Wu is an actor who is trying to ascend the ranks to Kung Fu Man, who is basically the pinnacle of what Asian actors can aspire to, or Asian American actors can aspire to. And the gimmick, the conceit is that as Willis Wu is an actor, he's also living out his life. That basically he's acting real life. That real life is a performance, a TV show, a movie, whatever. And so the book itself is written as a film script or a television script. And that technique just really makes the prose rather stilted, particularly the expositionary prose. It just comes off quite stilted. And yeah, I unfortunately didn't really get on with this book. Although I will probably come back to it at some point. I'm not entirely happy with my reading. So we'll see how it goes. Although I do think I misplaced it. I'm not entirely sure it should be in my science fiction and fantasy shelves. I think it should be with general fiction, because while Charles Yu is a science fiction writer, I think this book is rather more literary than it is in any way speculative. Although the concept of real life also being a dramatic performance does share some similarities to a short story he wrote that's in Third Class Superhero, which is a bit different because in that case it's much more of a mental break for the protagonist, while in this one it's played not as psychologically. It's more sort of not realistic. I'm not entirely sure what I'm trying to say here, but anyway. So yeah, I ended up bailing. And I moved on to Wind in the Tower, Mao Zedong and the Chinese Revolution, 1949 to 1975, by Han Suyin, which I mentioned in an earlier video today, as this is one of my books for Has Steve Read It Season 2. The Wind in the Tower is a history of the first decades of the People's Republic of China. And it was written in the mid-70s, essentially around, it was published in 75, 76. And the book is notable for being incredibly pro Chinese Communist Party, Mao, certainly very pro-Mao. Every few passages will have a glowing line extolling Mao, as well as supporting the Cultural Revolution. And of course, given what we know now, obviously last week I talked about Tombstone by Yang Jixing, which basically was an exhaustive history of the Great Chinese Famine and Mao's direct role in exacerbating the crisis. And he's also written a book on the Cultural Revolution, The World Turned Upside Down, which essentially probably does the same thing. I haven't gotten to it yet, so I don't know for sure. But I mean, I've read enough on the Cultural Revolution to see that it was essentially a means for Mao Zedong to maintain his power, to return to power, as he was sort of sidelined or didn't feel as respected or as influential as he felt he should have been in the early 60s after the Great Famine. But when in the tower, Han Suyin very much takes Mao's side. A lot of the conflict is placed upon the head of Liu Shaoqi, who was the president of China at the time and later purged in the Cultural Revolution. And so, I mean, I'm not entirely sure how useful this book is. I mean, the history is certainly superseded. We know far much about this period of Chinese history, and a lot of what she reveals, or her information, was lies. Either her lying, or more than likely, her contacts in China lying to her, and her uncritically passing on those lies. Although there are hints here and there of the truth, if you look closely enough. But, so I mean, I don't know. And the writing's not that great. It's very sort of roving, and just, I didn't care for it, unfortunately. I mean, it is interesting as a look at what was known at the time. I'm sort of similar to, or as maybe a source for something like Julia Lovell's Maoism, A Global History, or something similar, or popular conceptions of the People's Republic of China at the time, rather than once new research kind of revealed what actually went on. So anyway, but I decided to bail on it. And in a way, Wind in the Tower has been depressing me a little bit, and I'll get to that in a few minutes after I talk about the two books that I did finish, as well as what I will be reading next week. Well, this weekend and then during the work week. So the first book I read this week, I'd originally planned to read Interior Chinatown over the weekend, but I'm thinking I really don't want to. I really would rather read The Last Shah, America, Iran, and the Fall of the Pahlavi State, or the Pahlavi Dynasty by Ray Takeyh, or Takeyh. So this is a history of the reign of Muhammad Reza Shah, the last Shah of Iran, from his coronation in 1941 to his overthrow in the Iranian Revolution in 1979. And the book explores how the Pahlavi state, Iran during this period, worked, of how the Shah relied upon the clergy, the landowners who formed the Majlis, the parliament, and the market, to sort of maintain his authority, to maintain his control and how Mohammad Reza Shah wanted to modernize Iran, but the only way he saw to do that was by him assuming absolute power, by becoming the sole ruler, the lone ruler, and how ultimately that drive and his reliance on the military and only the military really drove his eventual downfall as he hollowed out his traditional basis of support. He turned the clergy against him. He gutted the political class, the landowners. His policies alienated the market, on and on. The book also looks at how, during this period, Iranian politics often engaged in superpowers, either by playing them off against each other, as Reza Shah, the Mohammad Reza Shah's father, did during the early years of World War II, where his policy of neutrality, by playing the Germans off against the British and the Soviets, ended up causing his throne, as the British and the Soviets needed Iran as a sort of way to get military material from Britain to Russia, and how in 1941 the British and the Russians occupied Iran, removed Reza Shah, and were convinced to allow Mohammad Reza Shah to assume the kingship. And it also looks at sort of America's role in Iran throughout this period, and argues that America really wasn't as malignant a force in Iran. I mean, there was, of course, the overthrow of Mossadegh, which Takeyh argues was the Americans acquiesced to it. They gave as little support as they could get away with. I mean, the only real important thing probably was convincing the Shah to act. But the coup itself was initiated and led by Iranians, and so on and so forth. And the chapter in which the coup takes place, as well as the earlier nationalization crisis, and of course the Islamic Revolution, those chapters are amazing, as well as the chapter Master of the Universe, where Mohammad Reza Shah is at the pinnacle of his power, and he's becoming a force in global politics and expanding his ambitions. And the chapter's really good too. So anyway, so I quite enjoyed The Last Shah by Ray Takeyh. So after I've read The Last Shah, I read the final part of the Legend of the Condor Heroes novel. So this is volume 4, A Heart Divided. So we begin where we ended volume 3, and we continue on with the adventures of Guo Jing and Lotus Wong. I quite enjoyed the novel for the most part, or this part for the most part. There are two very affecting arcs. The King of Dali, particularly his tale, is amazing. And then sort of the kind of conflict between Guo Jing and the Quajin sect and Apothecary Huang is amazing. And there's definitely the highlight of this book is the Detective Lotus, where she figures out quite a few things, and her summation is just an amazing scene. So yeah, I mean, quite enjoyed those parts, as well as the contest of Mount Hua. The one issue I have with the book is that after Detective Lotus, there's an arc in which Guo Jing returns to the Mongolians, and he serves for a number of years as a general for Genghis Khan. And I didn't like this arc. I thought it kind of just didn't really work because it's, I mean, it's too much time passes, and it sort of, I think it felt rushed. Like Jin Yong was beginning to run out of steam. He was looking for ways to wrap up the story, and yeah, I don't quite think that part really works, or at least in book form. So we'll see. I mean, the thing about Legend of the Condor Heroes is that it was serialized, so the story itself is rather episodic. There is no central plot. It's sort of roams about, and it just unfortunately kind of peters out towards the end. Although Mount Hua is quite an interesting highlight at the end, but still it does peter out quite a bit. And it's also reflected, I think, in the villains. There is no one bad guy. I mean, Wanyan Hongli, the Prince of Zhao, for the Jin Empire, is, in some ways, I mean, he's a political big bad. But then he doesn't really have that satisfying final confrontation with Guo Jing. I don't think. And then you have like Yang Kang, who really, as a rival of Guo Jing, is a bit disappointing. Although, thinking about it, it really works better him, Yang Kang, being an antagonist for Lotus. That I think that conflict is much richer, really. And then, of course, there's Viper Yang, who, in ways, the most dangerous of the villains, and also in some ways the most interesting. And yeah, but I do kind of like his appearances in this book. So, but I think on the whole, the villains, while interesting at points, can also be rather, but particularly I think Wanyan Hongli and Yang Kang. But anyway, so I quite enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to watching one of the film adaptations, which I actually discovered the particular series I want to watch is actually available on YouTube in English subtitles, so I might check that out. I mean, there's also one or two versions on Amazon Prime, or available through Amazon Prime, so I might check those out too. So, what will I be reading this coming weekend and week? Because I'm pretty sure this book's going to take me the whole of next week to read, and that will be The History of Bhutan by Phuntsho. I'm pretty sure this is going to be a soup to nuts history of Bhutan, and I'm quite looking forward to it, so I'll give you more on it next week. And I will also be reading The Triumph of the Moon by Ronald Hutton. This is a history of Wicca and neo-paganism, or at least the British version. And I've been looking forward to reading this book for quite a while. And this is my kind of sort of contribution to maybe Midrash, which is a readathon that focuses on religion. So, yeah, that's what I've read, what I build on, and what I will be reading. So, My conundrum is the past few days, um, I've been kind of down, and I've been thinking seriously as I've been trying to struggle with season 2 of Has Steve Read It, that I want to get back into manga and collecting manga again. And while at points I'm rather excited for it, I'm currently looking at picking up the first volume of Magi, The Labyrinth of Magic, and Orient by Shinobu Ohtaka. Um, and I've been looking for the first volume of Magi, The Labyrinth of Magic for a while now. But I'm hesitating because the one thing about manga is that, particularly the kind of manga I like, they go for a lot of series. So I think Fullmetal Alchemist, which is another title I'm thinking of picking back up, went for 20 odd volumes. Magi, The Labyrinth of Magic went for 37, 38 volumes. Seven Deadly Sins, I think, went for a similar amount of volumes. Fairy Tail is in excess of 60. Bleach and Naruto are 70 plus, and that's a lot. And it's rather expensive, which kind of puts do I really want to get back into this, particularly given that expense, and given that there are so many other things I would like to pick up. So I don't know, and I'm kind of debating with myself. So I don't know exactly what I'm going to do. I'm probably not going to make a decision this weekend or this coming week because it looks like we're in for a good week's worth of constant rain. The next time you see me, well, it won't actually be the next time you see me because it wouldn't have been raining that much and I make more videos than just weekly reads. But I was going to say, the next time you see me next week, I might have gills. That's it's going to be. They're predicting about 5 inches of rain, which is much needed, as inconvenient as it is, because we're in a drought. It's rather, it's kind of like level 3, I think, for my area. We've been getting quite a bit of rain lately, so the drought's eased quite a bit, but hopefully this soaking, if it happens, will kind of wipe that out. So anyway, BookTube, yeah, I will see you next week with some new tag videos. I was going to do one on Thursday, but it didn't. I need to give it some more thought. And my answers were not necessarily book recommendations, but just really commenting on the questions. So we'll see what tags I find next week, and if there are any other videos I would like to make, and of course there'll be weekly reads next Friday. So anyway, BookTube, until next week, thank you, have a great afternoon, and stay safe.